In the book Outliers, Gladwell talks about something called the 10,000 hour rule. And the 10,000 hour rule is this. If you spend 10,000 hours intentionally practicing something, you become an expert on that thing. But here's the catch. Once you become an expert in something, about 70% of that action gets relegated to your subconscious. You've put in the hours, you've done it enough, and it becomes sort of automatic. Okay, so what does any of this have to do with race? Well, I want to give you some dates. The first is 1619. 1619. This represents the year that the first Africans were brought to the US as slaves. The second date is 1954. 1954 is the year of Brown versus Board of Education. This is the case that was meant to desegregate our country. Now, for the sake of this example, let's assume that in 1954, our country integrated and everything was great. We know that that's not the truth, but just track with me. So 1619 to 1954. This represents a span of 335 years. Now, for these 335 years, our country intentionally practiced the dehumanization of, the abuse of, the exploitation of, and the segregation from Black people in this country. For those 335 years, Black people were owned as property, were refused citizenship, were treated as less than, were bought and sold as commodity, used for entertainment, and disregarded. Now, if you're wondering how that time breaks down, those 335 years represent 294 10,000 hour units. So our country became an expert 294 times on the dehumanization of, the oppression of, the abuse of, and segregation from Black people in this country.
Went down to the river Jordan, where John baptized 3. When I walked the devil in hell, says Johnny baptized me. I say roll.
In the late 19th century, an evolving scientific theory claimed that human beings could be categorized and ranked by such constructs as social standing and group affiliation.
Drawing on Charles Darwin's theory of biology that the fittest will survive, this science, called social Darwinism, perpetuated various myths about how societies evolved.
Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to?
Because most people don't understand that the process that produced the slave was a process of dehumanization, because a human being cannot and will not be a slave. You are certainly familiar with, and most of your audience should be familiar with, the infamous Willie Lynch letter, which rather succinctly illustrates how that was approached, this effort to destroy the self-esteem and replace it with self-loathing in these Africans in order to facilitate the creation of this new creature, which would be docile and accept his or her own inferiority automatically, that they would come into the world being taught that they were inferior. And once that was accomplished, we have what we have today.
What woman wants to marry or have children with a man that she perceives, quote unquote, to be a deadbeat? So, well, let's engineer the African American community and the African community, because this is the same issue going on in Canada. I was just in Europe, it's there, it's here, it's probably in Africa too, okay? Where we want the women to get a stronger and a better education than the men. And we want to equip the women with the better jobs. That's going to set up a natural imbalance in the Black home, because in most human cultures, the woman to some extent is dependent on the man to some extent. Only amongst black folk is that totally in the reverse. The black woman doesn't have to get anything from the black man. Everything she needs, she can get directly from the white man in terms of job and education. So for a lot of black women, if they don't value culture, if they don't value family, if you're looking at the black man purely from a functional perspective and a practical perspective, what use is he? This is what a lot of black women say. I have my education, I got my job, what do I need him for? If you're reducing him to a paycheck, if you're reducing him to a means to an end, he has no relevance for you. It's only when you respect culture, when you respect family, when you respect the fact that he's a black man, whether he has a job or not, and that you cannot exist without him and he cannot exist without you, only then can you value what the black man brings to the table. What is he worth? Like slavery. Get up on a slave body. How much is he worth? Black women have been conditioned to do the same thing with black men. What is he worth? Not who is he? How can he help you? What does he bring to the table? What type of a father would he be? That's irrelevant. Reduce him down to a dollar sign. And that's why so many black men seem irrelevant and useless for black women, because the American racism has engineered a system where we don't get the jobs and we don't get the education.
How's my race affected me? Personally, as a black man? It's affected me. That's a really interesting question, because I never really thought about how it affects me, as opposed to the things that I do to adapt to my surroundings. It affects how you present yourself, and that, common perception of a black man being less than them or someone to be feared, because we see these images of ourselves on TV all the time, and in a negative way. And I think that's done purposely to distort the image of black people, minorities, period.
You have movies that come out, and you have white actors that play black people or people of color with painted skin and just acting silly, acting out of manner, acting like an animal or what have you. And then you have the cartoons that come out and they portray us with overly big noses and overly big mouths or what have you, and just acting as if we don't have any sense. And so that's kind of just been brainwashed, through the years in media, to Americans about who we are. We're always portrayed in movies as criminals in some form or fashion, thieves, robbers, or what have you. It's portrayed that I'm a criminal. When I go into a store, I notice that the clerk is looking at me or stares at me, right? Or they'll get up and they'll follow me around the store. And on top of that, a black man, the conversations are different, right? So even before I leave out the house, my parents are constantly reminding me, if you get pulled over, from the cops, don't resist anything. Do exactly as they say. Always show your hands. And I'm sure that these conversations are much different than a Caucasian person growing up in the household, or even a Hispanic person growing up, or what have you. It's definitely different. You would never understand it unless you were in this skin.
I want you all to go to your windows. Go to your windows and yell out, I am sick and tired of being a nigga.
Tell the government, I don't wanna be another nigga. Tell them white folk, I don't wanna be another nigga. Tell them black folk, I don't wanna be another nigga. Tell the world, I don't wanna be another nigga. Waiting with my hands out, broke in the hood, they give a damn about.
The 13th Amendment to the Constitution makes it unconstitutional for someone to be held as a slave. There are exceptions, including criminals.
The loophole was immediately exploited. What you got after that was a rapid transition to a mythology of black criminality.
The state legislatures of the South passed more and more and more restrictive measures which were effectively designed to criminalize black life, to make it essentially impossible for any African American man who didn't live under the explicit protection of some white landowner to not be in violation of some law at almost all times.
Overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, it was big business then. It's big business now. You're going to get free labor one way or another. New slavery is imprisonment. Why was this? It was so successful. By the mid-1898, nearly 3/4 of Alabama's total state revenue came directly from this institution. Now we're arresting them at alarming rates. And for what? 12 years for vagrancy, loitering, startling a white woman, looking menacingly at a white woman. That's what they got 10, 12, 15 years for. And many of them, 25%, died convict lease, more than during slavery. Because there were no, now we have another label to justify our behavior towards them. And what's their new label? Convicts. They're criminal. Don't they deserve it? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, slavery, well, and that's a good point. You know, slavery, modern day slavery has evolved over the years, just like with our welfare system. I believe that the welfare system was designed to actually keep people down than to help them out. It was disguised as a way of helping and assisting minorities, but it never gave you tools to go to school to further your education. Everything about receiving aid from the government was meant to keep you down and separated as a family. For example, the woman's receiving welfare, you know, she couldn't have a man in the house, you know, and what did they do in slavery? To keep families apart and keep them, to keep us from uniting and being strong as a family and keeping us enslaved, not just in person, but in your mind as well.
Because that's the biggest thing people don't understand. That's the biggest ploy right now is, you know, white people are getting played too because they're getting pitted against, you know, us or other minorities. And really the wool's being pulled over everybody's eyes while that's done because we're too busy, you know, bickering and fighting. And then this same stuff is still going on. The people at the top it's still going on how they wanted to. They're playing the puppet master, but I think that as the more we come together and we realize these things aren't changing, then we'll go about it in a better fashion together, and we'll just take back our power, you know, as a people.
But before, they had white schools and black schools. Mm-hmm. They had black bathrooms, black water fountains, and everything. And everything was segregated. If we, like Sears used to have a cafeteria, and if you wanted to get something from there, you had to send to the end of the counter and order it. We got to learn that all of us the same. No one is better than the other. But when I was coming up, it was like the whites are better than the blacks. And that's not so.
Animals, beasts that needed to be controlled.
You better believe it.
It became virtually impossible for a politician to run and appear soft on crime.
The kinds of kids that are called super predators.
Millions of dollars will be allocated for prison and jail facilities.
3 strikes and you are out.
It was an enormous burden on the black community, but it also violated a sense of core fairness.
Some people got the real
The states were required to keep these prisons filled, even if nobody was committing a crime.
It's so difficult to talk about mass incarceration because it has become heavily monetized.
The focus is on taking people from prison, putting them in community corrections, parole and probation.
How much progress is it really if now there's a private company making money off the GPS monitor?
We now have more African Americans under criminal supervision than all the slaves back in the 1850s.
The war on drugs and the Get Tough movement, the wave of punitiveness that washed over the United States on the heels of the civil rights movement. Drug convictions alone, just drug convictions, accounted for about 2/3 of the increase in the federal prison population and more than half of the increase in the state prison population between 1985 and 2000, the period of our prison system's most dramatic expansion. Contrary to popular belief, people of color are no more likely to use or sell illegal drugs than whites. This drug war has been waged almost exclusively on black and brown communities. In fact, where significant differences in the data can be found, it frequently suggests that white youth are more likely to engage in illegal drug use, drug abuse, and drug dealing than black youth.
So you may be asking yourself, so then what do we do? How can we move beyond this? Well, renowned poet and author Maya Angelou has a beautiful quote that says this: first, recognize that I'm a black woman, and then forget that I'm a black woman. We will not be able to move past race in this country until we are willing to acknowledge what race has meant and continues to mean for how we interact with one another, what we expect from one another, how we see one another. Please do not fall into the lie that we shouldn't see color. Instead, face head-on the fact that this country's expertise in segregation, oppression, and racism has created subconscious realities of what we want each other to do, where we think we should be, how we think we should talk, live, where we should go. And the only way to move past that is to move through it. We can no longer rely on our automatic responses to tell us how to treat one another. Instead, we need to start intentionally practicing something else and understand that we are working against a 335-year-long deficit. So if we're going to move past it, it's going to have to be intentional. We have to start becoming experts in something different.
When the night has come and the land is dark and the moon is the only light we'll see,